Woo! The Golden Stallion, the man of tomorrow, Savzu, the rated R radio star, here for you for a little, well, it's normally Wednesday Q&A. This week it's Thursday, though. And thank you to everybody. I actually got a lot of great response. Not that I was looking for great response, but I got a lot of great response from yesterday's episode where I did a dedication to, well, really, I mean, frankly, someone I considered a friend. I mean, I might as well just call it at the end of the day. That being Richard Hatch. And yeah, thank you so much. I had to say that, had to get that off my chest. It took like 40 minutes. I did not want to take an entire Sovereign Tech episode, talking about that. But anyway, I thought it was an important subject. So, it was an event. It was something that really affected me. Yesterday was kind of a rough day as far as that goes. But anyway, we are not here to talk about that. If you want to, if you want to hear me talk about that, you can listen to yesterday's Patreon-only episode. But now we're here for the Patreon-only Q&A, and I just want to say a hearty welcome and thank you to all of the new patrons that have come on recently, and there's been a few of you. Thank you very much. And of course, always loads of thanks for the patrons that have been with Sovereign Tech for, well, as long as I've been, pushing Patreon-only content, and even the people that were doing it before. Thank you so much for that. You really help make all of this go round and round. I mean, it's just a fact. So thank you. Anyway, why don't we break into... So this funny thing happened on the way to the moon. No. That's the name of a terrible documentary. No, but a funny thing happened. In putting together this Q&A, I have been teasing this for about a month, that I would, and some of the questions were actually asked some time ago. Some of them are questions related to, I did the Hidden History of Christmas Patreon-only special, which was, a discussion of Christmas, where it came from, things like this. Of course, I'm an atheist. If you don't already know that, you know that now. And so I've been teasing this, and there was a couple other questions. And the funny thing is that while they're not all inherently religious, they all tie in very nicely together. Like these questions, if I can get to them all. They really do tie in very nicely. Like they kind of, one could build right off of the other. And it almost creates a theme, and some of the questions actually kind of answer other questions. So it's very tough for me to decide which one to go with first here. Now, we're not really, there's going to be a little bit of tech talk here, some science talk, and there's going to be a lot of history, and there's going to be a lot of religion. Again, I'm an atheist. But I happen to be an atheist with a doctorate of divinity, and my doctorate of divinity is going to get put to the test with some of this here. Because some of this is pretty deep cuts, as they would say, in various industries. But it is, I did find it interesting that this real, very disparate questions from very different people, kind of came together to create really what I think is going to end up being a cohesive whole. Before I do get into those questions, though, actually, real quick, I want to address, somebody asked me about if I would be interested in doing an album of the week, as in music, a music album of the week, like one that, just kind of a pick that I would do. And I think they wanted me to do it in Sovereign Tech Prime episodes, in the main episodes that come out on Saturday. I'm very open to doing that because I am a huge music fan. It is so integral to my life. Because I know there's some people that are just like, oh yeah, music, oh, the beat's good, okay, I'll dance, whatever. As to I am, absolutely. There's a lot of things where I call myself a dilettante, but there are they're kind of two genres, two aspects of, shall we say, civilization, of society, where I have no qualms in saying that I am an aficionado, not a dilettante, but an aficionado. And those two areas are definitely music and science fiction. I'm an absolute aficionado when it comes to those. I will take on just about anybody's knowledge. I will take on, I have no problem taking on anybody's taste. But of course, taste can be somewhat subjective. So anyway, I think I'm going to do that in the future. And maybe play a quick little cut in the middle of an episode of Sovereign Tech or something. Maybe come episode 225 when I shake things up again. I may do that, where I'll do an album pick, and maybe I'll, play or at least part of, I don't know if I'd play an entire song, but at least part of a song, that I consider to be the best track from the album or something like this. But I will do that. But I'll tell you, I had some people ask me. In fact, I had a great guy ask me this week on social media. It said, all right, I'm going to go work out. I need some metal. Give me some good metal to work out to. And I like just instantaneously. I mean, I told him what I listened to, especially recently. I said, all right, check out Hailstorm. That's Hale. Check out Hailstorm's Into the Wildlife. This is an album from 2015. I think I might have given it album of the year for 2015. If I didn't, God damn it, I should have, because it was so good. And instantly the guy just wrote back and said, "Holy shit, this is amazing." So, there's nothing. I got to tell you, there are very few as good feelings as when you share an album with somebody, some music with somebody, and they just kind of give you that nod of approval, like, "Yep, that's good shit." Like, yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for. That because I mean, music kind of touches the soul, if you know what I mean. Not that I believe in a soul, but it touches a lot of different aspects, shall we say, of consciousness, I think, and has very diverse effects, upon the human condition, I think. Not adverse, but diverse. And so when someone else gets it, when someone else really, when that they understand why you enjoyed that music, or it's a more of a rarer album. I mean, Hailstorm's kind of mainstream, of course, but which Lizzie Hale, oh yes, baby, but she's something else, real hedonist right there. But anyway, when someone else gets it, you feel a connection that is, I mean, just so meaningful. I think a very rare, deep connection that you can feel with somebody. So anyway, I'm really honored that people ask me for music picks. I'm really honored that people actually ask for, "Hey, would you do an album of the week? We just want to know what you're into," and all this, and that's really cool. So anyway, I mentioned Hailstorm, Into the Wildlife. I'm going to give you one more, then we're going to get into all this religious subjects, but all these disparate subjects here that actually make up a kind of a theme. But I want to make sure, that when you're done with this episode, that you have some proper satanic hedonist stuff to listen to, so that you don't fall into the trap of what I'm about to talk about. No, I jest. But the other album that I think people may enjoy if they've never heard it is actually a 2011 release. So this is pre-Sovereign Tech, before Sovereign Tech existed. But it's a 2011 release by Within Temptation, which is a band from Europe that I really consider maybe out of the past. I guess now I can't say the past 5 years. I guess I have to say decade or something. Maybe one of the two most underrated bands of the past decade, Within Temptation. The other one being someone who was in my top 8 picks for heavy metal in an episode I did a couple of years ago. The other one being Amaranth. So Amaranth, Within Temptation, two of the most underrated bands, probably the most underrated bands, both female-led, by the way. In the music industry, in my opinion. So anyway, Within Temptation, 2011, they came out with an album called The Unforgiven. And now the first track is kind of because it's kind of a concept album. It's telling a story. It's actually kind of a story about vampire hunters or vampire. I mean, it's cool. I dig it. It's very sexy, not Twilight in any way. And the first track is just kind of an opening, I don't know, narration. So I can't really say from the first track that it's great. But once it gets to the next 4 tracks, 2, 3, 4, and 5, holy fucking shit. This album will kick your ass in such a melodic way. It's so good. So Within Temptation, The Unforgiven, if you've never heard that album, just wait till you get to the second track. I mean, right from there, bam. I mean, the whole album's great. But those first 4 songs, shall we say, are just dynamite. Faster, Fire and Ice, oh man, and the other two, just so good. So there you go. There's a little album pick for you this week. Maybe I'll do that on these Q&A episodes up until I actually bake them into Sovereign proper. So how about that? Anyway, all right, here we go. We're going to do this. Some of these questions I've needed to do. I've been teasing for some time, so I don't want to hold it off any longer. All right, so let's get to the question, and this one is going to get into, so this is going to segue nicely, because this is going to start off as kind of technological, but then it's going to get into the historical and the religious. And then the following questions will be 100% religious and historical. And then after that, well, why spoil the surprise? So, so here it is. All right, Stallion, I've got one for you. What is the Aleph? I ran into this concept in Mona Lisa Overdrive and Distress. Neither book explained it to my satisfaction. I am pretty sure you have some insights on this elusive concept. And woo, do I. Now, of course, Mona Lisa Overdrive is a book from the 80s by William Gibson. It's part of the Sprawl trilogy, which, by the way, I've talked about the Sprawl trilogy for really since the beginning of Sovereign Tech, because I've said, and I still hold to this, while some of my opinions have changed over the years on Sovereign Tech, this is one that is not. And that is that we are heading towards the Sprawl. The sprawl is this idea of these, mega cities and all this different shit, right? Now, we've talked about this on Sovereign Tech before, like the concept of Bosny-Wash, right? Bosny-Wash is just, well, not an acronym, but it's a combination of Boston, New York, Washington. Like the idea that the bulk of the East Coast is, or, the Northeast Coast is already a gigantic city. Like it's already a megacity, kind of like out of Judge Dredd, right, where it's Megacity 1. We talked about this, again, on Sovereign Tech. We talked about Bosny-Wash in particular. And that I think this is the direction that things are going. The sprawl is, again, that this is this concept, and out of all these different books like Neuromancer, Count Zero, all these different ones that a lot of these books that William Gibson has written, which I love those books. I mean, they're fucking awesome. So, yeah, as to where I think some people think that, we're heading towards, I don't know, some kind of, I mean, that could still be, the sprawl can still be dystopian, where everything's a city, kind of maybe a better way to think of it might be like Coruscant, or Coruscant in Star Wars. Or Trantor, maybe for the fancier, for the for the people that know the Foundation, saga from Isaac Asimov. As to where some people think, oh yeah, no, we're going to get back to nature, everything's going green. Yeah, no. The genie of technology, that bottle has been opened. Okay, Pandora's box has been shattered, and technology's here to stay. And it's also like I don't see really anywhere. I mean, this is a whole other conversation. I don't see really anywhere where like this push for going green is going to become like the order of the day on planet Earth. I think it'll become a big deal in space, which if you listen to the Hangouts. By the way, let me hit that too. When the Hangouts episode that I did a live video hangout, had a bunch of people join, some about 20 people. I mean, that's pretty, since it was only patrons, that's pretty good. Like that wasn't bad at all. In fact, as I said on the episode, I know a lot of Liberty or even tech shows that would die to have 20 people live interacting, during a recording. That is also available. That was made available like within hours of doing it on the Patreon feed if you just want the audio and not the video. But thank you to everybody for that. I thought that was a tremendous success. It went off really pretty much without a hitch, and I'm definitely going to be doing more of those. Now, one of the questions I got in that was from a great listener who asked, what do you think is the next innovation? And I said, well, we really are going to be going to the stars, and in pretty short order soon. We're going to be we're going to be inhabiting the solar system. I don't think we're going to go beyond that, but we are going to be inhabiting the solar system and, quote unquote, colonizing it, etc. Fairly, in my opinion, fairly soon. Like, I think that's really going to be a thing. So now to do that, you're going to have to take on green technologies, but that doesn't mean that the Earth itself will do that. I think we're definitely heading towards a sprawl. So anyway, all that aside, let's get back to the Aleph. Now, in the book Mona Lisa Overdrive, particularly, the Aleph is being used like what this is, and it's ALEPH if you're wondering. The concept or how it's being used in that is that it's this like this massive, super capacity cyber hard drive. Like it's a hard drive that can hold so much. Okay, in particular, there's the character of the Count, of course, from Count Zero. What was his name? Bobby Newmark, I think, where Bobby Newmark, is connected to this, and the idea is that it would have, it would just have so much capacity that, this Aleph is a hard drive effectively, or it could be a computer, but it is a piece of technology that could contain the entirety of reality. Like there's enough memory in it to where like everything could exist. It's a literal cyber world, and everything that we know of reality could be there, and like the entirety of a human's personality, everything about them could be in there, and not just that. It couldn't just hold that entire personality, okay, but it could actually allow that personality, like a normal human being, to learn, grow, and act upon itself, independently. So it's an interesting concept, not that far out, frankly. I mean, well, at the time, probably in the 80s, it was pretty far out. It's not really a far out concept now. I mean, that's kind of happening. Things we've covered on Sovereign Tech in the past, where like literally intelligence agencies are actually trying to sort of do this, to where they are creating kind of virtual representations of everybody they have data on. And they're like the idea is, I think, is that they're trying to war game, what exactly could happen in reality, and how they're going to interact with that, or how they could track certain people, trace people, or whatever. But that's again, that's another one of those conversations that we've had over the years. But that's the concept of the Aleph, like within William Gibson's world itself. It is effectively a hard drive, with just enough capacity, enough RAM, all that, okay, to where it can actually contain the entirety of reality within it. Now, William Gibson, though, it wasn't necessarily his idea, or like, I mean, making it a hard drive or whatever, okay. And a cyber hard drive in Mona Lisa, in the Sprawl trilogy is a little more than just your average hard drive, obviously. But I mean, like, it does a little bit more than just what you think of as a normal, platinum hard drive. Now he took that term from a short story. Okay, now actually the Aleph has a much older history, and we're going to get to that. But first, let's go backwards from where the question asker was starting from. Now William Gibson based his Aleph off of an idea by Jorge Luis Borges, who wrote a short story. In fact, there's a great collection of his short stories we're talking like the 1940s here. And I think he did a re-release of it in the 70s, which is the Aleph and Other Stories. And in this, he talks about like this little, I mean little, like I think it was something like not even like an inch in diameter. I mean, it's like a marble, effectively. But within this home, there is just this, this little sphere that has, like, when you look into it, you literally see all of existence. You see everything all at the same time. It's not just, like you're seeing infinity. Okay, it's more than just seeing. You're seeing space and time sort of at the same time. It's very, very. And the thing is like, well, how can you see all of that? Like, it kind of reminds me, and of course, this, the short story, The Aleph, by Borges, was written before Frank Herbert's Dune, where in Dune you have the idea of prescience, right? Where Paul Atreides, Muad'Dib, where he can see like everything going on, or he can see all the possibilities sort of at the same time. It's kind of like that, but it's a little different in that you're seeing like everything at the same time. But it's sort of like prescience in that way. And you see it, and somehow, just looking into this little sphere, like, you see everything, and like, you're not confused by what you're seeing either, but like everything's overlapped and you're just seeing it sort of all at once. It's a very interesting concept. Now, Borges, talking about it or why did he name it the Aleph? Well, there's a very good reason for this. And that is because the Aleph, now the Aleph itself, that word, Borgia didn't come up with that. That is the name for the very first letter in the Hebrew alphabet. Okay, now the Hebrew alphabet has 22 letters as compared to the 26 that English speakers know, and well, I guess some of them love it. Personally, I think English is a horrendous language. Not to say that Hebrew is that much better. It is in some ways, but well, anyway, that's another conversation for another time. But it represents, so in Hebrew, it doesn't just represent the first letter. Okay, it doesn't just represent like it's A. It doesn't just represent that. It also represents the number 1. And this is where things, are going to get a little bit interesting. And it's a big deal. The Aleph is a very important symbol when you start digging into Kabbalah. Okay, now Kabbalah is a confusing subject in itself, and I don't know how deep I want to go into that. Okay, because Kabbalah. So here's the thing with Kabbalah. First off, is that Britney Spears and Madonna wearing red strings, or Ashton Kutcher or whatever wearing red strings around their wrist is not Kabbalah. What they were taught in Hollywood, like this little Hollywood cult of Kabbalah, is not Kabbalah at all. When I was growing up, I was informed, and I mean at a super young age. Okay, so understand this about Judaism. Let's break this down, and this will go right back into what exactly is the Aleph as far as science fiction and as far as like what was being kind of put on display in Mona Lisa Overdrive and all this. It's all related. Okay, in Judaism, there is a saying, and despite what anybody will tell you, yes, absolutely, this does get taught. Okay. The saying is that first, and this gets told to little Jewish boys. The saying is, first, be glad you were born a man. Second, be glad you were born a Jew. Now, a lot of people want to write that statement off because, that sounds, that sounds awfully sexist and racist, right? Like this is, when you get into sort of the Jews are running everything, conspiracies and all that, people love to point to that kind of statement. Well, it gets said, it gets taught, it got taught to me. So, based with that as the base here, okay, let's understand this is that I get taught that at a very young age at Temple, and then you hear about Kabbalah, but what gets taught about Kabbalah to young people is that look, you don't dig into this until you're 40, and you only do it if you're a guy. Now, where does Britney Spears and Madonna fit into that? They fucking don't. I mean, Madonna now, sure, she's well over 40, but this is the thing, is that like the study of Kabbalah, like the real study of it, where you start traveling to other realms, and everything, you might start controlling demons and all the shit that gets talked about with Kabbalah. I mean, in Judaism, look, nobody touches it, and again, until they're over 40, or at least that's kind of the set rules for this sort of thing. Okay, so when you hear Kabbalah, understand that what you know of probably on TV has almost no realm in fact. Even if it's on the news, it has no basis in fact of what Kabbalah is and has been taught for at least a few centuries. That's another argument entirely. Is Kabbalah really ancient Jewish knowledge, or is it just a medieval creation that kind of came out of the Enlightenment and out of these studies, and kind of is it just the Jewish version of alchemy and and all of that? Right. I mean, that's an entire other conversation, that can be had. However, the mathematical principles that have been applied to the Jewish alphabet, like Aleph, meaning number 1, and a whole slew of other things. I mean, it gets pretty far out where people say that, the Jewish alphabet actually, or, the Hebrew alphabet, actually ties in perfectly with, our concept of DNA. Like you can map, the alphabet maps with DNA. I mean, people go nuts with all this stuff. But anyway, Kabbalah was really, at least the writings that you can fairly say were from medieval times, which is again when a lot of people argue it has really started. Have a mathematical basis. Like there's a huge emphasis on numerology. Not to say that that's necessarily new for religion to do, but to be so well codified is a very new thing. Like, when you read the book of Zohar, which again, you're not supposed to read that until you're over 40. Okay. There's a whole slew. There's not just the book of Zohar. There's other ones. There's the book of creation. There's a bunch of these. And so you have a lot of mathematical principles in that, and so it's not unheard of. And I mean, and it gets applied to modern math. The concept, or one of the ways of not measuring infinity, because how do you do that? But one of the ways that you notate infinity within math today is what's called Aleph. Okay, it is a concept of infinity. So when Borgia was writing, back in the 30s and 40s, and he came up with this concept of, this little device that allows you to see the entirety of existence, all at once, calling it the Aleph was perfectly reasonable, because that is a representation of infinity, and that is what you'd be seeing. Now, to get into, like even and the Aleph, the idea that it represents the number one, this is kind of a big deal, and this is how I'm going to try and tie it back into, and I hope I'm answering this question with to some satisfaction. How this goes back to William Gibson and the idea of the hard drive called the Aleph that can store the entirety of reality within it, and can store the personality of a human, can store human existence within it to where a human could grow and pretty much engage in everything that makes up the human condition. Using the Aleph for that is actually brilliant, because, and in fact, I'm reminded of an old quote from Carl Sagan, which goes something, and it's from the Cosmos TV show, which I've pretty much memorized by heart. I watch it so much, but in that he talks about the simplest concept, or like the simplest logic, like the concept of the number one, is an elaborate logical underpinning, and it's true. Like the very fact that a human being can understand what the number one is, I think there's a case that could be made that is the very start of consciousness. Because the concept of number one, I mean, is understanding, first off, that you are, I mean, it encapsulates so much, that you're an individual. Understanding the number one is, like that test that they do to animals where they look in a mirror. Do they recognize that that's not just another creature, that it's actually them? That is an understanding of the logical underpinning of the number one, of Aleph, right? Just at its base level, not even Aleph representing infinity, but in Aleph representing the number one. So, the very notion of consciousness, the very notion of you even beginning to understand that there are things outside of you, that there is infinity in all this, that you act outside of instinct, could easily be wrapped up in the abstract concept, and it's not that abstract. I mean, it doesn't have to be abstract. It's just abstract in the way I'm describing it. The abstract concept of number one is central to the whole thing. So, calling something that encapsulates the entirety of reality the number one is absolutely brilliant. Now, some people might want to take that interpretation to say, oh, well, we're all connected. We're all one, man. No, we're not. I mean, yeah, we're all made of star stuff. I'm totally on board with that. But we're not all connected. Okay, there is underneath that cranium, there are things that no one else knows about, and it's probably a good thing for a lot of us. Because the number one doesn't have to mean that we're all connected, we're all one. It could just mean, no, I'm an individual. I am one. And that's huge. I mean, that's a huge concept to consider. So, and in some ways, not that you create reality, but to quote Carl Sagan again, we are a way of the universe to understand itself. Meaning that you, the individual, are, yes, you are made up of star stuff, which the universe is made up of, but the universe doesn't experience itself. The universe gets experienced through the fact that we are individuals and that we have agency, and and that we can we have senses and that we can experience everything. It's a huge concept that's so tough to put into words. So to call this stuff the Aleph, I think is absolutely brilliant. Now, how does the Aleph get treated? Within Kabbalah itself. Well, it gets treated that way because the idea is that one contains everything. Like one contains all the other numbers out there because it's the first number. And again, yeah, I think that fits in very nicely with what exactly we're describing here, in that it's the start of all consciousness. So the Aleph, historically, religiously, and honestly, even within Borgia's work, within William Gibson's work, within Mona Lisa Overdrive and all that, it is, the Aleph is a perfectly named thing to to contain the entirety of reality, because all of it exists like within Kabbalah, where everything exists within the number one. Everything exists within you. Again, not that you create reality, but there's no perception without you. Huge subject. So the Aleph, again, basically the Aleph itself within within Mona Lisa Overdrive is that really is all the Aleph is that it is a hard drive that contains the entirety of the universe. That's the basis there. But I feel like William Gibson was definitely, he was playing with stories of creation, I think. I think he was trying to say, you don't exactly get hints of this in other books, or you might get a little bit of hints, but sort of the idea of simulation theory, I think Gibson was trying to play around with simulation theory, saying we're all inside the Aleph, and we've known it for a long time, and that's why all the oldest religions, have this very idea that there is this, singular thing that all of reality, exists within. So anyway, that I don't know. I don't want to spend much more time on that question, but I hope that answers that. It's a huge concept. The history of just the term the Aleph, and it's not just in Hebrew. Other languages also use the term Aleph. Phoenician. There's a lot of Arabic alphabet. It's the first in the Arabic alphabet as well, which is probably why Maimonides didn't mind writing in it. It's a very ancient concept that is properly named in further science fiction, in that it can contain all of reality. So anyway, I hope you found that interesting. I'm not sure exactly where further to go with that. If there was something I missed or something I didn't touch on, you can ask the question again, and maybe I'll dig deeper. Though I think we went for a pretty deep dive there. So that's. Yeah, I think Gibson was hinting at that we are in a computer simulation, even though it didn't exactly, there's hints, but he didn't say it outright, and that's really what the Aleph is all about as far as within science fiction. But you got to find out, wait a minute, why did they call it the Aleph? What is this huge concept anyway? That's being laid out. So there you go. Okay. But that plays nicely into some religious questions, which have to do with Judaism, or at least Jews. So let's get into those, and then maybe we can get into our third question, which I hope to be able to do, because I think that will tie in directly with some of what we were just talking about. So again, these two questions were asked pretty much right after I did my Hidden History of Christmas, within which we talked about the birth of Jesus. We talked about all this different stuff. And my claim is that Christianity is actually a significantly older, that Christmas is a significantly older holiday than something that was created by the Christians, and it's something much older than even the pagans were doing. I tied it all the way back to Calendar, which is a Jewish holiday that had to do with when Adam realized that, the idea was basically that the winter solstice, that Christmas is based off of the winter solstice, which that's supposedly where the pagans, they stole it from the pagans, and which certainly Christianity has taken plenty from the pagans. But the thing was that, Jews claim that, or Judaism claims in some texts that, that the pagans actually stole it from Judaism, that they stole it from the Hebrews. And, the concept of calendar, this whole holiday, is that Adam, the first man, was going around, and he noticed that the days were getting shorter, and he thought that it was part of his punishment for what happened in the Garden of Eden. But then he realizes, after the winter solstice, that, oh shit, the days are getting longer again. And so he's like, oh, celebration, this is just the natural way things go, but I am so happy. I am going to have effectively, I'm going to have some feast days. And that became the calendar, celebration, which in, years down the line kind of turns into Christmas, right? Or, turns into a pagan festival, then turns into Christmas, blah, 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 and you go on down the line. So, but anyway, we ended up talking about that, there's lots of problems within that. I mean, and that for the Christians to say that Christmas is their holiday is positively ridiculous. In fact, it didn't even start getting celebrated until like later in the 4th century. We broke into all that with Constantine the Great and everything. And that Jesus himself, like, probably wasn't born anywhere near December 25th. In fact, my best guess was in May. And that's a guess that a lot of people make as well. So anyway, these questions have to deal with that. So I'm going to read them, and then we're going to break down into that. If you haven't listened to the episode, The Hidden History of Christmas, please do go give that a listen. I think you might find it interesting, regardless of your religious or anti-religious affiliation, by all means. So anyway, here's the question for it. 2 questions, couple thoughts on the episode, and then something unrelated, which I already covered the something unrelated in a past Q&A. But here we go. 1, I've read that in Jewish tradition, a prophet is believed to have been born around the same time of year as when they die. Since we know that Yeshua being Jesus, died around Passover, and I know you mentioned there's a belief he was born in April, any thoughts that he was likely also born around Passover? I don't see any problem with that. I'm totally open to that. And yeah, there is, in certain midrash, there are claims that a lot of different prophets had died kind of around the same time that it's almost like Mark Twain, right? Where I came in with Halley's Comet and I'm going to leave with it. And then 70, however many years later, he did. He died when Halley's Comet came back. So yeah, I mean, that concept, sure, it is a concept within Judaism. And again, I have no qualms with the idea. I'm just 100% certain that if Jesus lived, if he even existed, he was not born in December. Like that just didn't happen for a slew of reasons, which we covered some in the Hidden History of Christmas episode. So him being born in April, around Passover, sure, totally open to that. No qualms whatsoever with that being a thing. I think even May would still fit in, fairly nicely with that, because it doesn't have to be so exacting, certainly, that they die within that time. So anyway, there's the first bit. I don't really have a whole lot to add to that, other than if you've never heard Jesus called Yeshua, so understand that Jesus is a Greek name. It's a Greek word, and Yeshua is the Hebrew name for Joshua. Jesus' real name would have been translated to Joshua or in Greek anyway, and Yeshua is how you say Joshua. Yeshua is how it was originally pronounced, in Hebrew. My only guess is that the reason that the King James Bible called him Jesus, and that other texts, even like maybe the Vulgate or whatever, would call him Jesus, was to differentiate him from Joshua son of Nun, and that's Nun as in, like, that's the name of the person, not that they were a son of Nun. In English, it's kind of funny, right? Like when you translate that in English, because Jesus was, kind of the son of no human, really, except for maybe, Mary. But anyway, that's just a funny play on terms. But Joshua, son of Nun, of course, from the Torah or from the Old Testament, it was just to differentiate kind of the two. But then, strangely, like, they didn't call Joshua Yeshua, or I mean, not Yeshua. That's a weird one that people use. I have no fucking clue why people say that. But Yeshua. So, okay. Anyway, let's see. number two, here's the second part of the question. This is where we're going to dig deep. I'm inclined to believe that Yeshua was born in 7 BC and crucified in 33 AD, meaning he would have lived to the age of 40, which has symbolism in Judaism. Thoughts on this? Okay. So yeah, we're really going to dive deep here, and I'm going to do my best, my level best of trying to explain this. Oh boy. Okay, so I would gauge, and I think I had said this in the episode. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of debate that it's anywhere that Jesus was, or Yeshua was actually born somewhere between 8 BCE and maybe like 2 BCE, somewhere around there, as to where most people say, oh yeah, well, because, or like with BC, it's before Christ, and then AD is Anno Domini, which means the year of our Lord, as in he was born in 1 AD, right? That's pretty much widely held as completely inaccurate. Now, a lot of people seem to not really care when Jesus was actually born, which I don't care. Like it doesn't mean anything to me, but I understand why it does mean something to some people. But at the same time, like the people that it should mean something to, they seem to not really dig deep into this, because I think that there's a lot to be said about it. Now, the question asker is right. The number 40 has heavy significance within Judaism. You can instantly think of 40 days and 40 nights, right? With Noah, that's how long he was in the ark. Popularly how long he was in the ark. Then you have 40 years in the desert with Moses, right? Which creates the concept of, and this is somewhat of an important biblical concept, which is the idea of a biblical generation. A biblical generation is 40 years. Now, 40 years has a lot of other meaning. 40 years has a lot to do with, honestly, with Venus's path, in the Earth's sky. How humans encounter. Venus is this incredibly important planet that I think a lot of farming and a lot of other calendar keeping was based upon. Not just the sun and the moon, not just a lunar or solar calendar, but also Venus represented some very important concepts on the calendar as it started. And so 40 years is part of a complete traversing of Venus, the way it's represented in the sky, when you're looking down from the Earth. Okay, because obviously Venus doesn't go around the Earth. It just takes different positions in the sky, and there's like a full cycle of that, which takes about, which can take 40 years. So anyway, the 40 years, yes, is an important thing, not just in Judaism, but in many religions and many historical contexts. So the idea of Jesus living 40 years is a very attractive one, because that means that he would fulfill kind of a biblical generation of sorts. Now, I would argue that no, he did not die at age 40. He would have died at, and I'll be exacting in this, if I were a Christian. Okay, if I were a Christian, I would say this. As an atheist, I don't know. Okay, but if I were a Bible-believing Christian, I despise that phrase, but if that's what I was, I would say he lived to be 33 and a half. Exactly. Almost exactly. He might have been off by a couple days, but he would have lived to be exactly 33 and a half. Now, interestingly, that would stand in contrast. If he lived to be 33 and a half, well, maybe it wouldn't stand so much in contrast, because he would be resurrected. And so, yeah. Okay. So I'm not going to say that negates kind of the first part of the question that we talked about. Was Jesus born in April? But I would say that he was born to be 33 and a half. Now, the reason I'm going to say that I don't think he was 40 is because Jesus constantly says within the New Testament, within the Synoptic Gospels, not just the Synoptic, but all 4 Gospels. The Synoptic Gospels are Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then there's John, which doesn't necessarily contradict, but stands like, reads very differently than Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And of course, the argument is that really they were all originally based off of Mark, because it's such a short gospel, and that like there's this idea of the Gospel of Q, where there was an original text, and that Matthew, Mark, and Luke were actually written maybe in the first or second, or like in the 2nd century, much later on. So whatever, I'm not getting into that. So in the Gospels, Jesus, which is, other than maybe the book of Hebrews and the book of Revelation, that's where you get quotes from Jesus. Okay. Uh, in the Gospels, he constantly says, this generation will not pass until such and such happens. And one of the things that he's talking about when he says this generation will not pass until like the glory of God is seen on earth or whatever, he's referencing the day of Pentecost, like when the apostles' tongues were set on fire, and all this other kind of wacky stuff was happening, right? And so the idea is that Jesus was talking, if he was talking about a biblical generation, which 40 years is representative of that, okay, then he was kind of clearly saying he wasn't going to see the end of that generation, especially when what he was prophesying about, like, say, about the power of the kingdom coming down, was definitely something that happened well after he was dead. So I don't think that, I don't think he lived to be 40 for that reason alone, because he did not, because he talked about generation. I mean, and some people say, well, but the Greek word for generation could mean other things. It could mean race. It could mean all this different stuff, right? Okay, if that's how you want to reinterpret things, well, I mean, that opens up all other cans of worms, and that's fine. But you're asking my thoughts on it, so here you go. I think he means generation, and if I were a Christian, he knew exactly what he was talking about. So I don't think he lived for that entire generation. And again, that is the concept of generations, 40 years, which started all the way back with Moses. Or Moshe. If we're going to call Jesus Yeshua, we're going to call Moses Moshe, because that's how you say it in Hebrew. No, we won't go on with that. But, all right, so I don't think he lived to be 40 years. Now, I have a lot more to say on that also as to why. I mean, there's that answer, but then there's more to it. And that is that I think Jesus was born somewhere around 4 to 3 BCE. Somewhere within that. I think there was actually, if I were a Christian, or if I'm just somebody interpreting these books and pretending, say, that it's all just, some kind of very impressive fiction, I would go back to Daniel chapter 9. In Torah, or in the Old Testament, with the prophecy of 70 weeks. Now, this is an incredibly contentious prophecy. What happens is that in Daniel chapter 9, Gabriel is, Daniel is praying. The character of Daniel, if you don't know who Daniel is, okay, this is during the Babylonian captivity. Please look up about Daniel. I can't spend an entire hour describing who Daniel was. Okay, but Daniel was a prophet. There you go. Also, well, admittedly quick, he was a contentious one. In fact, the book of Daniel barely made it into, because it was so new, it barely made it into Torah. Like, it was barely considered part of the Jewish scripture canon. So, that's something to keep in mind. But anyway, Daniel, is praying, and, Gabriel kind of gives him this revelation, effectively, of the 70 weeks. And I'll read a little bit here for you from the New Revised Standard Version. You can choose whatever version you want. It's not going to change what I have to say, frankly. I mean, it's really fucking not. But go ahead. If you love your King James, you rock and roll. Anyway, so this is from starting with verse 24 and going into verse 27 of chapter 9. 70 weeks are decreed for your people in your holy city, to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Now, we can and you want to be careful with context, I understand that. All right, but with verse 24, doesn't that sound a lot like Jesus? Like that it's kind of talking about what exactly Jesus is going to do, especially when you read in the New Testament, when you read the book of Revelation, or no, I'm sorry, the book of Hebrews. When you read in the book of Hebrews talking about how, Jesus set up according to the order of Melchizedek in heaven, he set up, effectively like another tabernacle, right? Like he set up the most holy place. It reads very similar. Okay, now, it reads very much like exactly that's what Jesus is doing. He's bringing everlasting righteousness. He's putting an end to sin, right? Because now all sin have been washed away when you accept Jesus as your Savior, right? So it's, just from verse 24, it sounds like we're talking about that at the end of it, something's going to happen. Okay, and so anyway, and it sounds a lot like Jesus. Let's go on with verse 25. Know therefore and understand, from the time that the word went out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the time of an anointed prince, who's the anointed prince, there shall be 7 weeks, and for 62 weeks it shall be built again with streets and moat, but in a troubled time. Verse 26. After the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing, and the troops of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. Verse 27. He shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall make sacrifice and offering cease, and in their place shall be an abomination that desolates until the decreed end is poured out upon the desolator. Now, I want in verse 27, this is really important. And for half of the week he shall make sacrifice and offering cease. It says he shall make a strong covenant. Okay, now in the Bible, and I mean the entirety of the Bible, Old and New Testament, okay, even though I grew up Jewish, there's really, the Bible's only the Old Testament, but whatever. Okay, so in the Old Testament, you have a covenant, right? The covenant, of course, is what was made, started with Abraham, and of course, ends up in its fruition with effectively the books of Moses, with Mosaic law, okay, with Torah, like that's the covenant. Now, in Jeremiah 33, within the Old Testament, it talks about, it's the only other place where it talks about another covenant. And in Jeremiah, in chapter 33, is talking about a new covenant. And he says that the law, which is the old covenant is the law. And even if you're big on the New Testament, the Apostle Paul says all this. Okay. The law is the old covenant. And he says, but then Jeremiah goes on to say, the law will be written on their hearts, and this will be the new covenant, meaning that they'll just be living it. They won't have to follow it. They won't have to, there won't be like necessarily maybe a need for the Sanhedrin and all this different stuff, is that the law will be written on their hearts. And that is the new covenant, that people will just be filled with this righteousness and they'll move on. Okay, so, but what brought on that new covenant? What allowed for that? Under the Christian perspective, the idea is that the death of Jesus is what allowed for the new covenant to come in, and that we're not held under the old covenant anymore. That doesn't mean that you throw away the old covenant, because again, it's the law written on our hearts. Okay, so that is the new covenant, that Jeremiah was talking about, and it's the only other covenant. So what covenant, what strong covenant being made could Gabriel be talking about to Daniel? Well, the covenant that Jesus made with his death. But here's the thing. That covenant will be made with many for 1 week, and for half the week he shall make sacrifice and offering cease. Okay, so something's going to happen in the halfway mark during this week where, if you're following, what I'm laying out here for you, and you don't have to. I mean, this is the thing. People disagree with what the Bible means all the time. Okay, but at the half week point, something occurs. But now this is all very strange. What do you mean this is happening in 70 weeks? Like 70 weeks is nothing. Like that doesn't even make, what is 70 weeks? How many days is that? Right? I mean, this is, this can't, what's going on here? What the hell is this whole 70 weeks thing? Okay, that's going on. Now, to understand the 70 weeks, in my opinion, what you have to actually take on is this concept of what they call a prophetic day. Now, this is not new. The idea of a prophetic day is a concept that exists well outside of just Christianity. The Baha'i faith believes in it. There aren't a whole lot of Christian denominations. Seventh-day Adventists believe in the idea of a prophetic day. Jehovah's Witnesses believe in it. I think there's some Pentecostals that believe in it. The Christadelphians, which that's a whole other that is a whole other subject. There's this idea, and the idea of a prophetic day is that when there's a prophecy being laid out, which is exactly what's happening in Daniel chapter 9, when a prophecy is being laid out, when they mention a day, it usually means a year. Okay, so that's why they call it like a prophetic day or a prophetic year. So when he says 70 weeks, each of those, 70 weeks, which adds up to what, 490 days, right, is actually 490 years. And this is, why would they mask things like this? Well, the idea is that like Jesus himself said, or as is said throughout the Bible, that the wisdom, like, it's easy enough for babies to understand, but even the wisest are fools compared to it. Meaning that, like, to some degree things get written in code so that people that so that some people sort of don't get it. Like, they have to research, they have to come to faith, they have to come to the Holy Spirit to be able to understand what's being said. It's not meant to be secret necessarily, but it is until you really deep dive. Like, it's just saying, look, you have to read the whole thing. You can't just take bits and pieces, otherwise you'll never understand what's going on. Okay, that's a biblical concept. And so you have this 490 years. Okay, that's actually what, because the 70 weeks equals 490 days, and that's what that represents. Now, there's points within it that were like, okay, so when does this, let's say, and again, to understand my interpretation, you sort of have to accept this idea of the biblical day, or of the prophetic day, or prophetic years, where one day equals 1 year. Now, when you do that, starting off with what is supposed to be happening with much in that prophecy from Daniel chapter 9, okay, that would start off with, and most people don't argue with this part. A lot of people, they think that the 70 week, like, this is actually an area where a lot of people agree with this, because they believe in this whole, like, that 70 weeks isn't literally 70 weeks. It means 490 years. But there's a funny thing that happens in the middle of this, okay? Not even in the middle. We'll break into it. So, most Christians agree that the 70-week prophecy starts in 457 BCE, okay, which is exactly when the Jews were told that they could start, rebuilding the temple by Artaxerxes, okay? And this is described in the book of Ezra, chapter 7, all right? So you have that's where the 490 years start. Now, go forward, that 400 go forward that 490 years, and where do you end up in? From 457 BCE, you end up in 34 CE, or AD, however you want to rock that, okay? And we're not using the Holocene calendar here. All right, so from that time, that 70 weeks goes all the way to 34 CE. Now, what happened in 34 CE? What happened in 34 CE was, or at least what's widely accepted, is that this is when the Apostle Paul came into the picture. Okay, and we're talking, this is like in Acts chapter 7, where the original, kind of the apostle, or the person that Paul sort of took the place of, who was Stephen in the New Testament. This is when Stephen is stoned. Okay, and then and Stephen sees, as he's being stoned, he sees, Jesus, not stoned like, not like that, like people are throwing stones at him. And depending upon your interpretation, one of those, people was Saul, who would end up becoming Paul. But he ends up seeing Jesus. And this is sort of the start of the big apostolic missions, arguably, is when Stephen, dies, and then Paul, of course, comes onto the scene as the apostle to the Greeks, right? So there's our 70 weeks, 457 BCE to 34 CE, the starting of the building of the temple, and then Stephen getting stoned to death, and Paul coming onto the picture. All right. Now, So here's where things get weird. Here's where we're going to get very complex. A lot of people have no problem, and they think it makes tons of sense that the 70 weeks actually does lead into, or let's say 69 of those weeks, because the last week, remember, was very special, as described in verse 27 of chapter 9 of Daniel. Okay, that last week's really special. So people will end up, so if you take off that last week, you end up with 69 weeks, which means you end up not at 34 CE, you end up at 31 CE, which is a perfect spot to where Jesus is crucified, like a year that fits very well with a lot of timelines and chronologies that Jesus would have died at the age of 33. Or effectively, 33 and a half, as I said, but we'll get into that more. Okay, you won't end up in 31. You'll end up like in 30. Like, Yeah, sorry. Okay, like I said, this is going to be confusing. You're not. So with the last week, okay, if you take that away, you don't end up in 31. You end up like in 20, 27, 28. Yeah, you end up in 27, which is when Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist. All right. So then the ministry begins. Now, for some reason, and this became very popular with what was that guy's name? Timothy O. Not O'Leary, obviously. The guys that did the Left Behind series. This whole concept of like that there's this that you have this tribulation that everybody's going to be going through, or that there's this rapture, right, that occurs before the tribulation, in the end times, according to the book of Revelation and everything. So this whole idea of this, what they call a pre-tribulation rapture, or if you're talking to Christians, they'll say that. They'll be like, oh yeah, pre-trib. It's very, you have a lot of, when you get into end time prophecies and end time studies and all that, I mean, suddenly there's a whole bunch of shortcut terms, and there's a lot of different opinions. There's the premillennial, postmillennials, millennials, which have nothing to do with young kids today. They're terms that reference when exactly is Jesus coming back, when exactly is a lot of this prophecy, say like in the book of Revelation, which of course really is just composed of a bunch of different shit said in the Old Testament, or at least most of it is. When is all this supposed to go down? Okay, so you have, boy, I'm going long. I don't know if I'm going to get to the third question. You have, okay, this last week, and so this idea of the whole, like that the whole Left Behind series lays out, to where there's this 7 years where all this, like there's the rapture is going to happen, all these Christians are going to get taken up, then there's going to be 7 years, there's going to be 3.5 years of peace within that 7 years, and it's going to be during the reign of the Antichrist, and then the last 3.5 years, you're going to end up that's when the tribulation's really going to happen, and then you get into all the different stuff that happens with the dragon and everything in the book of Revelation, and it's going to be hell on earth, near literally. So, but here's the funny thing, is that so they're using the last week from Daniel's 70-week prophecy, which they admit 69 of those weeks add up to the time that Jesus gets baptized and really starts his ministry. And then they take that last week and they just toss it at the end of time. It's the weirdest fucking thing in the world. Like, I mean, not that the Bible's logical, or that, well, all right, I'm not going to insult anybody, but you know what I mean. Okay, you know what I'm going to say. Come on, it's me. But that really doesn't make any sense, even in a Christian perspective. Like, why the fuck would you take that week and just toss it all the way to the time of the Antichrist? No, it doesn't belong there. It stays right where it is. When you get to the 69th week, you start living into the 70th week. In the 70th week, okay, because remember, in verse 29, it said that for half the week, like then the sacrifice is going to happen. Or this big change is going to occur. And the argument is that 70-week prophecy, when it's talking about, that the half week, the 3.5, that means that that's referencing 31 AD, or 31 CE, the time when Jesus was crucified. So Jesus would have died, pretty much at the age of, because he started his ministry at 30. We're fairly confident of that. Okay, and so he would have died, at the age of 33 and a half. And then you have what happens in the next 3.5 years. That's part of that 70-week prophecy. Well, at the end of the prophecy, at that time, that's when the apostles pretty much start their shit, is at the end of that 3.5 year. And then you have the 70-week prophecy, is when the apostles, really begin their mission. And they go forward, and the church is now a thing. That the Christian church is a thing after the stoning of Stephen. So that's kind of that's the idea. Now there's a lot more that happens after that. Okay, because it really turns into with Daniel, because I mean that's just Daniel chapter 9. When you get to chapter 8, and a lot of people connect Daniel chapter 8 with Daniel chapter 9, because in Daniel chapter 9, it doesn't appear he's actually having a vision, just Daniel's praying, and he's, there's kind of a relaying of the words of Gabriel. So some people, when he's talking about a vision there, they think he must be talking about the vision that Daniel was clearly having in chapter 8. And that turns into not a 70-week prophecy, not a 490 years, right? That turns into a 2300-day prophecy. That turns into a whole other thing, okay, to where, and again, a day equals a year, and so then you end up with, this thing that ends up happening in 1844 CE, just what, 160 years ago. And yeah, there was the Leonid meteor shower in 1844, and so, some people take that as a sign. Anyway, this is getting into the Millerite movement, which the Millerite movement was this idea that, yes, the world was going to end in 1844, because that was going to be the end of this 2300-day prophecy. I mean, it's really, really interesting, analysis of what exactly is going on in the book of Daniel. Now, it's not as fun as, say, some of the analysis of the book of Daniel that, like, Isaac Newton did, and oh yes, he did. Most of his books were not about science, they were about religion, and one in particular was about the prophecies of the book of Daniel, and he has some very interesting things to say in that that I'm not gonna go into now because I want to eat dinner, frankly. but so the 70-week prophecy. Not even getting into the 2300 days prophecy, from Daniel 8, but the 70-week prophecy out of Daniel chapter 9, I think when you lay it out as logically as you can with a book like the Bible, I think you end up with a very clear case that, yes, Jesus died at the age of 33 or 33 and a half, and you have this very nice timeline that matches up pretty much starting with in 457 BCE when when Artaxerxes tells the Jews, after kind of conquering Babylon, all right, you guys can build your temple now, because obviously that's a huge moment. And I mean, really, even at the end of the 70, well, we're going to get into a whole other stuff that I don't need to get into. So there's my thoughts on it. As far as, like, do I think Jesus was 40? No, I have two big reasons why I don't. First off is that I think his death was part of the fulfillment of very clear verses, particularly Daniel chapter 9 verse 27, where Jesus dying is part of the fulfillment of that. And that would have been, again, widely accepted in Christianity that the 70-week prophecy starts in 457 BCE. There's no debate there. It's that last week, the 70th week, that everybody debates. Some people toss it at the end of time. Other people, I think more accurately, stick it right within the life of Jesus, and it prophesies exactly when he dies. And he wouldn't have lived to 40, in that case. Because again, we know he got baptized at 30, so I mean, you have very specific time frames you got to match up with that. So that's my opinion on that. Please, if you think he lived till 40, that is a-okay. Like, I don't care. You just asked me for my thoughts. So you have that, and then of course also the fact that I really think in Jesus' own words, he claimed that he would not live a generation. What did he mean by generation? Yep, that can be totally up to debate. So that's why I came with two answers, not just one. As far as why I think he died at the age of 33. So anyway, there you go. That's, whew, I'm going to take off my Doctor of Divinity hat. Oh, well, shit, maybe I better not take it off just yet, because we got to get into something else. And this won't take a whole ton of time, but it is a very interesting concept to get into. If you want to look into if you want to read more about all of that stuff, I think if you just type in 2300 day prophecy of Daniel, you're probably going to end up with a huge explanation exactly why the 70-week prophecy, was fulfilled by Jesus, and the stoning of Stephen, and Paul coming onto the scene and all that. Anyway, you might have fun with that. So there you go. Okay, now, out of all that, somebody asked me about plasma cosmology, as in what are my thoughts about plasma cosmology, and I won't spend a ton of time on this because, admittedly, I'm not a huge expert on the matter. I'm really not. So this idea, I don't think he was really the first one, but there is a very famous book by a guy named Eric Lerner that came out in 1991. There's a revised version, I think, in 93. That's the one that I read. And I read it because, kind of at the time, like, my parents were converting to Christianity and all this. And, I was an Adventist, and they're creationists. So, they think that, the Big Bang is bullshit. Well, when a guy writes a book called The Big Bang Never Happened, which is exactly what Eric Lerner wrote, that catches an eye, especially the young person who also happens to be obsessed with Star Trek, who fancies himself a young scientist, and so I read the book, and I actually reread it later on too, but anyway, Eric Lerner had this big idea of plasma cosmology, pretty much saying that, and this is my very brief understanding of plasma cosmology. There's a lot of endpoints to plasma cosmology that I agree with, but I don't. There's problems. Okay, so plasma cosmology is pretty much the idea that it's not all gravity controlling everything. There was no Big Bang. There may not even have been a beginning to the universe, which that part intrigues me. But that the universe, all the motions, effectively the motions of the heavens, is all being done by ionized gas and plasma. Gravity might be a thing, but it's not the central thing. As to where now, with most cosmologies, with the bulk of physics, we understand as being, this hodgepodge of, quantum physics, kind of, relativity, Einstein's theory of relativity, and all of that, and that gravity is this huge deal, which was kind of the main point of classical physics, right? And so it's like three different, popular physics, or, mainstream physics is really a combination of like 3 or 4 different things. It's really not just one school. As to where plasma cosmology really does simplify it all down to, no, it's this. So my thoughts on it in general, like most of what I know from it is from what I remember from Eric Lerner's book. I agree, I'll say this, I agree that the Big Bang didn't happen. There's one major problem with plasma cosmology. We'll get into that in a second. Okay, I agree that the Big Bang didn't happen. I am open, just as plasma cosmologists are open to, and again, understand, they're not mainstream at all. I'm not saying they're stupid. I'm just saying that they're not mainstream. I am open to the idea that the universe has no beginning. In fact, I'll put in the show notes for this episode, in the appendix. This is a story I keep handy at all times, and it's from phys.org, February 9th, 2015, and it was all about kind of this theoretical framework devised out of the University of Lethbridge in Alberta, Canada, that said, well, maybe the Big Bang didn't happen, and in fact, maybe the universe doesn't have a beginning. And of course, for me personally, the Golden Stallion, what's exciting about that is that also means that the universe has no ending, which is great. Okay, because otherwise there is a point where, guess what, folks, all the math in the world, the Aleph, everything comes to an end. And that does not intrigue me. But of course, that's not, it's not like I'm responding to terror management theory. I'm intrigued by mathematical concepts that lay out that really the universe doesn't have a beginning at all. And that's also interesting because then you also have no need for a creator. Woo! So anyway, I'll put the link in the show notes. You can check that out. What isn't theoretical, but highly theoretical bit of physics. But it's an interesting one, and it kind of ties in to some degree with with plasma cosmology. Where was I? So I agree with there's no Big Bang. I agree with the possibility that there's no time under plasma cosmology. I don't agree with the idea that gravity is not the major driving force, but then also understand I don't agree with dark energy. Like, I think that's absolute bullshit. And actually, there's a lot of new research coming out just in the past couple months. And this isn't new. I've said this on Sovereign Tech before. Just in the past couple months that that dark matter. This is like patchwork stuff. Which is ironic, because here's the shame, is that, look, a lot, again, there's one thing that they don't get, but there's a lot that plasma cosmology could have right, and could get right, and it has just as much evidence as mainstream scientists do for, physicists do, for talking about, kind of the mainstream system of cosmology that most people subscribe to, with the Big Bang and, and all this different stuff. Okay, so, there's really no reason to laugh off plasma cosmology. So I'm somewhat open to it. The main problem that it has, let's get into that. The main problem that plasma cosmology has is that it really, and I know Eric Lerner's tried, but it really doesn't answer, the cosmic microwave background radiation, right? Like, it does not answer the CMB. It doesn't explain why exactly is that there, because the CMB kind of makes the claim, or the CMB sort of is it's the smoking gun for the concept of the Big Bang, because it says no, there has to be a starting point, because where does all this ancient light radiation come from, right? And there's not a really good, I mean, pretty much Eric Lerner, I think if I remember right, he was trying to say that, well, no, that can all just, that's from a composite of this and this and this, and it doesn't have to be, it doesn't mean that it's its own thing that had some kind of starting point. That's kind of the major gist that he brought up. I didn't find his argument compelling, which is probably why I don't exactly remember the particulars, but whatever. So that's a huge issue with that. Now, outside of, again, the article that I shared with you from phys.org that talks about how the universe may have never had a beginning, okay, that is kind of a new concept for me. It's not a new concept for humans. In fact, Epicurus, who is an atomist, Epicurus, the OG hedonist, okay, that we've talked about in recent Q&As, Epicurus said the universe had no beginning too. Like his scientific, and it was a scientific perspective on his part, was that the universe had no beginning. And understand, this is the same guy who said, look, when you die, it's over. There's no afterlife. Okay, so it wasn't like he had these wild concepts of eternity or some kind of afterlife or something like that. So not a new idea to humans, but it was kind of a new idea to me. Like, I just figured this was one of those things that Epicurus had wrong, but actually it ends up a lot of times Epicurus, even scientifically, gets proven right over and over and over again. Things we've talked about over the years on Sovereign Tech. So anyway, before that I kind of started looking into and buying into a bit this idea that the universe had no beginning. And I guess it's pretty much what I still am. I'm a huge proponent of what's called quasi-steady state theory, and this is something pushed by Jayant Narlikar, who is a very well-respected scientist. In fact, when you get the Quantum Physics 101 or Relativity 101, he wrote the book on that. Like, literally, when you go to college, that's the book you're going to get put in front of you, is by Jayant Narlikar. And he is a proponent of this quasi-steady state theory, which is the idea that, yes, there is a beginning, so you can explain the cosmic microwave background radiation, okay, but it wasn't just one Big Bang, it was a bunch of mini bangs that occurred. Okay, and the beauty of this is that while plasma cosmology doesn't answer the cosmic background radiation and where it came from, the Big Bang Theory does not answer why is there a uniform temperature, in the universe, when if there was a central point like the Big Bang where all of this stuff came out of, shouldn't certain parts be colder than the other? And they're not. As to where a bunch of mini bangs actually do explain why there's a uniform temperature, and also explains why there's cosmic background radiation. So yeah, I mean, just to kind of wrap it up. I mean, I'm not like necessarily against the idea of plasma cosmology and all this, and in fact it really kind of fits with the Aleph, right? Like this idea of infinity always being there, and in fact really plasma cosmology, in the fact that there doesn't necessarily have to be a beginning to the universe or a beginning of time, I think ties in very nicely, sort of with the theory we just described, but also in the fact that, and here's a funny thing. So when we get into Torah, when you read Genesis chapter 1, or what in Judaism is Bereshit. No, it's Bereshit, okay? But my brother and I at least love saying Bereshit. So when you read Bereshit, chapter 1, and of course there originally weren't chapters, but verse 1, in the beginning, right? That's how the Bible starts, in the beginning. So the Bible, I think, kind of contradicts itself, or at least Torah contradicts itself, in that there are a couple verses within Torah, one of them being in Proverbs, and I think the other end is in Psalms, where it says that Torah always existed. Now, this is a very weird concept, and it fits in nicely with the idea of the Aleph, that like there is this little ball, perhaps, or there's this hard drive that has the entirety of existence within it. And that's an argument within Judaism, okay, is that, within Torah, within those words, within that book, is the entirety of existence. It's not just a bunch of words, like literally everything, all of time, all of matter, all of the, space-time, the universe, everything is within that book. That's the argument. Okay, and that's another reason why, and I didn't get into that earlier, but that's another reason why using the word Aleph is very interesting. Okay, but the idea is that it's all in there. But within its own book, it says, I know it says in the beginning, but it also says that it has always existed. And so I wonder, and this is speculation on my part, and I'm not religious, again, I'm an atheist, okay? But I kind of wonder if, the ancient Hebrews, if they had some kind of knowledge of the concept that, no, there is no beginning to time, and we know that. And we know that, a lot of this has just always been here. And this is just how things have always been. Which stands in huge contrast to, obviously to the Big Bang. How does evolution fit in with it? Well, I mean, you can make some interesting cases talking about Kabbalah with the Aleph, right? You can make some interesting cases that, like in was it Sefer Yaritz, one of the Book of Creation, in Kabbalah, talks about how effectively, I mean, like it almost reads like evolution, where humans came from animals. I mean, it's an oversimplification, but the idea is there. So that could still be part of it. So, yeah. I mean, the idea that there was no beginning, that things have always been here, the universe has always existed, and all that, is an intriguing one, and it's one that may have some very, very interesting basis and some very interesting history that most people miss. So I love it when stuff like plasma cosmology gets thought up of, and like they really, like Eric Lerner, did his damnedest to create a really logical framework within which, it fits and answers a lot of questions. There's some that it doesn't. But then the Big Bang has some problems too. In fact, it's got more than one. It's got 5 or 6 that I can think of off the top of my fucking head that are wrong. So, if you want to write a plasma cosmology because it doesn't answer CMBR, well, then shall we start talking problems with your mainstream, cosmology? So anyway, there you go. Yeah, I don't buy into it really, but I think that there's a lot of great evidence, a lot of great scientific work, and a lot of great questions raised by it. So that's how I feel about plasma cosmology. I'm going long here, and yeah, I want to eat. So I hope you enjoyed the show. We didn't get into a whole ton of tech. We'll get right back into all the tech and all that stuff next week, but you control the show. I answer your questions, okay? It's your Q&A for the patrons. You get to control what happens. And so, people had these questions, so I fucking answered them. So there you go. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. If you have further questions on this, maybe I'll do a sequel to this or something. So there you have it. Again, got a great Sex and Science Hour coming out this week. Got a dynamite Sovereign Tech coming out this week, and we'll have all kinds of other, episodes interspersed throughout that. So, woo! Thank you so much for being a patron. We'll see you on the other side.
You just experienced Sovereign Tech. Go to sovereigntech.com, that's SOVRYN tech.com, and connect with us there. Find links from today's show and catch our podcast feed. Sovereign Tech is copy heart. Copying art is an act of love, and love is not subject to law. So please share the show however you like. Welcome to the evolution.